welcome to another episode of Classroom Chronicle. I'm Pete Braley. Thanks for tuning in. What we try to do on this show is to bring you into the classroom or onto the field, the court, the stage for the drama clubs, just to show you what's going on at the schools that kids from New Bedford can attend, whether it be New Bedford Voc, or Bishop Stang, or any of the elementaries or secondary schools. We also at times will talk about policy to let you know, maybe if you're a parent, what's going on or what's available in the classrooms in Greater New Bedford. Our guest today is Dr. Larry Finnerty, the longtime educator and former school committee member, and we're here today to discuss special education services that are available in New Bedford. Recently we had National Special Education Day and Special Education Week, and can I call you Larry?
Absolutely.
Dr. Finnerty, if you prefer.
I answer to many things.
Welcome.
Good to see you, Pete.
It's good to see you. We've run across each other at numerous things, commentating on the New Bedford half marathon. Mm-hmm. We spent many a cold day. In fact, you're still doing that, right?
Yes, I am. Many
cold days in March covering that race, and also at your role with the school committee. And do I have time for the quick story here?
Sure.
My daughter, both of my daughters, played field hockey. And I would go see that game, and there would be so many whistles. And one morning on the radio, I said, I don't understand all these rules. So that afternoon, I go to Bourne, where my daughter's playing for Fairhaven against Bourne High School. Halftime of that game, this gentleman, who's a referee, comes running over, and he says, I heard you this morning. Here's my rule book from last year so you can read up. You're still refereeing?
Absolutely, I love it.
Wow. So what are you, you're not running up and down football fields or field hockey fields?
Never picked up football. I played basketball in high school, and I refereed basketball from 1968 probably to 2018. The boys are a little too fast for me.
Okay.
So now I do boys and girls in the middle school, and I do field hockey, and I do lacrosse. Yeah.
Have you? I know we need to get to our subject, but have you noticed a change in? Because I read a lot about referees getting abused. That doesn't happen to Dr. Larry, does it?
You tend to have rabbit ears at the end of the season. If I hear the personal pronoun "you," followed or prefaced by something blah 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 you, that is punishable sometimes.
Wow!
It gets your attention.
How many years were you involved in education?
35 years in the school system.
Congratulations.
As a teacher, counselor, supervisor, director, then assistant superintendent. Most of it in the area of special education.
Right. And then also a member of the school committee, right? For,
yes.
What was it, 2009 to 17?
Yes, two 4-year terms.
Now, why were you suggested to be my guest for special education? Is that a love for you? Was that an area that you focused on?
I was the director of special education for the school system for 14 years.
All right.
And then Dr. Marginson retired, and I became the assistant superintendent for 6 years.
Right.
Then I retired from that and went on the committee.
Is there an easy answer to what is special education?
No easy answer.
Yeah, because I noticed I have a list of the different programs the school offers here, and it seems, was it that way when you started, or I would assume it's grown?
There's only been one category of disability that has been added since I've been aware of things, since at least 30 or 40 years, and that's autism.
Okay.
Autism was grouped in a category, and the advocates and the parents became very upset with that category and said that's not where our children belong.
Okay.
And the advocacy took hold, and they added it because of their outstanding work in that field, saying this needs to be a category alone.
Right.
Like they say, if you meet one child with autism, you've met one child with autism. Because
okay.
That movie, Rain Man, did not do the children any good.
I didn't realize that. It kind of generalized everything?
Well, yeah. What was it, Dustin Hoffman?
Yes.
Driving the car, had a tremendous savant knowledge of numbers and game shows, and was way over on one side of the spectrum, because we have children who are in the middle and children who have cognitive difficulties. So the wide range is unbelievable. A young child hears something, never has played the piano, sees his grandfather play the piano, hears a tune, and plays it. Tough to explain.
I know. Were you there when the special education program started?
Yes.
Okay, so take me back, because I really don't remember. I was a child of the 70s. I was in school in the 70s up at the Gyra Swift School and all that.
Oh, yes.
I don't remember any special education programs. There weren't in the 70s, were there?
No.
No.
Well, they began in the 70s. The federal special education law was passed in 75, signed by Gerald Ford. Took effect October of 77.
Okay.
So you could see they had the legislation, they had to do the regulations and ease it in, because it is vast. I can remember teaching at the Phillips Avenue School, and there was a common door to the principal's office. It was an old building, it's still there, maybe 6 or 8 at the most classrooms. There was a kindergarten. It was K to 6, so you can see there's not much room left over.
Right.
No cafeteria, no gymnasium, a playground. And the principal opened the door one day and walked in and said, "Just continue, Mr. Finnerty, I'm just looking for something." Looked around, family friend, and he told me after school, we were told to look around for children with disabilities. Be aware of any. Now, the obvious to the most lay people was, we don't have any children who have physical disabilities because there's no way to get in here. And that's how narrow our understanding was. We didn't know about specific learning disability.
Okay.
If a child had a hearing problem, if they didn't have an appliance, we wouldn't know that. If a child was legally blind, he may be in regular school with us. And many of the other areas of the communication, which a speech and language person would work with the child. If the child had a lisp, if the child had a misarticulation problem, there was not a category for that. So this really started to grow in the 70s. There had been some work done before that, but not in some of the categories that were added later.
Right.
Because we have about 13 categories.
Oh, wow.
And it's things that you wouldn't probably think about.
True. But the children were suffering, or they were falling behind. In some cases, that I would think that would be very frustrating to them also, because
they had some classes with different names.
Okay.
For instance, a workshop class really was for children who were having difficulty in regular, so to speak, classes anywhere in the city. So that would be aggregated at one particular building that had the space, and children who were having academic difficulties may be placed there. But that's
Okay.
before the old IEP came along and the protections of the disability law.
That's an individual education plan?
It's an individual education program, but
Program.
everybody makes the P into a plan, yes. Does the child have a plan?
Right.
That's how it's used, yeah.
I mentioned to Larry, we were talking the other day on the phone, and I told him that one of my children, my daughter, my youngest daughter, she had an IEP when she was in class. We learned, again, she was struggling. She was getting frustrated. She was not getting the work done in the same amount of time that the other children were. So I remember there was a meeting with the educators, and we developed this IEP. We discovered that she was a very visual learner. As far as reading and taking notes, that didn't work for her. She had to see it in front of her. And she was also granted more time on tests and things like that. So I have a little bit of knowledge, but that's just one of many issues, right?
Exactly, yeah. And as long as general education or regular education had that kind of flexibility, then special education would not have grown as big as it did and is now. But the categories have just, they've gone to 13 when you get to sensory, and you have deaf, sensory, blind. You have communication. That's the little children in the early childhood classes. Very many of them come to school with, because they're code switching from, say, Portuguese or French to English.
Oh, okay.
And the teacher is teaching in English. Do they have any articulation issues that should be brought to the attention of the speech and language pathologist?
Okay.
Yeah.
Did I read, what was it I read, that it's like 50% of the programs, let's see, special education comprises nearly 50% of all New Bedford Public Schools programs. So.
I remember you and I talking about that. I'm not sure what somebody meant.
Okay.
If they're talking about athletics and other programs, special education is big.
Right.
There are many staff, because of the restrictions of the regulations. Students who are in substantially separate classes have a teacher, a paraprofessional, and there's only 12 children in that learning environment
Oh, okay.
by law, because it's a substantially separate class.
Okay.
Where our children have, how it has evolved now in New Bedford, there are more and more children receiving those services in a general education setting.
Okay.
With children who do not have disabilities, who can act as peer models, role models, especially for articulation issues, where you correct yourself rather than have to have the speech therapist. But when you put the children in substantially separate classes for their education, 12 students, a teacher, and an aide, you're giving up space. So when this special education law came into place, urban centers had a great deal of difficulty.
I was going to ask you, when it first came to be, how it was received. Were people open to the idea? Did people question it? Did people fight it? Obviously, space was a major issue.
Space was a big issue, and I think it hasn't received the attention that it should have. Small schools like Swift School, had a grandson who went there a couple of years ago. There was no opportunity if all of the classes are filled.
Right.
But those were K-8 days, so they were 8 grades. Now we have this middle school thing, so it gave up some classroom space. But you look at the schools that have been built in the last 40 or 50 years, they're very big schools. Right down here, Dr. Jacobs' school and C-Lab. There are plenty of space in small settings and regular classroom size. But when it came into a small school, where are you going to do speech therapy? Many cases it was in the hallway,
Right.
underneath the staircase. People don't like to remember that, but that's really the way it was. And then when you needed a workshop class, as they called it, you aggregated that at the Knowlton School, which burned down, or the Clifford School in the
Right.
north end of New Bedford. And that's where teachers would be assigned for them, but they would come from different schools around the city.
How soon was it before you started to see success? Do you remember? Is it something that you look back on and said, "Wow, why weren't we doing this 10 years ago?"
I think it was a gradual situation, because when you call something special ed, the general ed teacher was around for a while. Here
Right.
comes special education with all its regulations. The child must be receiving special education and or related services like therapies from a licensed
Therapist
professional
yeah.
who's come out of school with that kind of training. They weren't around before.
I was going to say that there was no special training back in the day, right?
It was emerging. So it's a work in progress. So general education now saw the special education person in the building. So I guess those special ed kids go to him or her. And that was not the best way to do things, because people thought special education was a place. Special education is a service. But in practicality, where will the service be provided?
Right.
You have to do it in the least restrictive environment. You don't take a child who has a difficulty in communication and place that person all by themselves with another child who has a communication issue.
Right.
Keep them with the general education setting as much as you can.
Do you think a lot of these issues, like the ADD or ADHD, or however we want to label it, do you feel that those problems, those conditions, I shouldn't say problems, those conditions were always there? We just didn't have a name for it?
Absolutely.
Because I know our attention spans have gotten shorter. You can thank video and social media for all that. But a lot of these issues have always been there, right?
Now it has a name.
Okay.
And
is that good or bad?
I think it's good.
Okay.
For the most part, because it's a medical model. There's no doubt about special education is a medical model.
Mm-hmm.
What is the issue? And if you want to get it down to brass tacks, what is the problem?
Right.
He's having a problem with this or that. Okay, now it has a name, attention deficit with hyperactivity disorder. There are strategies that a well-trained teacher can take with that child. And we saw it all the time. A classroom when you were growing up in grade school, if there was a child who was fidgety and...
He got moved right near the teacher's desk.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Close proximity.
Yeah.
And also, if he got done with his work early, which he often did, it's a stereotype now. I mean, not all of them did. But if they did, you needed to give him something to do.
Right.
If you didn't, he would find something to do. So sometimes they had to carry something to the office, but he had done his work. And he's not someone who sits.
Right.
So we have to realize that you need to take the child's strengths, and that's what we did with special education in Bedford. Focus on the strengths that the child has, no matter what is the difficulty in the classroom. And we get through the referral for special education, then we check out the eligibility, we do assessment, and then we talk about what services will be provided. Then we get to where will we provide it.
Okay. Are we taking children from one school and sending them to another for therapy, or do we transport these kids during the day?
That has almost been obliterated.
Oh, good.
But it was around for much of the time that I worked, where you would have a child. Don't forget, we have responsibility for children who are in parochial schools.
I didn't realize that.
Oh, sure.
So if someone in a parochial school needs special education, that comes under the public school?
We have to work that out. Okay. It's not easy because there is an anti-aid amendment to the Massachusetts Constitution that says you cannot provide federally funded special education services.
Oh, wow.
In a parochial school.
Okay.
And it's difficult to work out. I've worked with Dr. Kalis many times after he retired, and I was near the end of my time working in the school department, about it being loosened up to allow for that to happen. And I know there's a lot of work trying to be done up on Beacon Hill about that. But that is an anti-aid amendment. It was also an anti-certain kind of person that politically got in there, because it was parochial schools, mostly religious-based,
right.
And it was a keep out. But you have a little child who has a need of an IEP for communication, which is what speech and language comes under, and they're 3 or 4 or 5. Don't forget, we have a mandate from age 3 to 22.
I didn't know that.
Special education is age 3, or whenever the child is diagnosed.
Right.
But that's the age. 3-year-olds don't have to come to school. If you have an IEP, you have to get the services. So if you're in general education as a 3-year-old or 4-year-old, even a 5-year-old, you don't have to come to school in Massachusetts. The school system has to have a kindergarten, but the parents don't have to send the children even at 5.
Oh, right, right.
But the 3, 4, and 5-year-old who has an IEP, because there's some problems that have been referred to us,
right.
we have to what's known as child find. We have to go find children at 2 years, 9 months as to whether it's the pediatrician, it's the daycare.
I was going to ask you, who identifies, or who's the first contact, I guess, that realizes we need to do something different here? Is it, you said
Most of the-
pediatrician?
Most of the time, it's a pediatrician, or if a child is, with our working community, brought to a daycare run by Miss Betsy or somebody, wonderful lady, whoever she is, and that lady knows 2 and 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds.
Right.
She's been there for years. Probably the mother went there, or the father went there, and she'll say, you know, he or she, there's something I'm noticing. Talk to the pediatrician. And the pediatrician can refer to the school system, and we have to set up a whole early childhood referral process in the neighborhood school, but usually backed up by the central office.
Can a student, let's say an older student, can an older student reach out to someone at the school to say, I'm having a problem? Because you know as well as I do, not all parents parent their children. So if they're not getting any help at home, can a student go to an administrator or their guidance counselor and say, I can't do that, I can't figure it out?
Oh yes, absolutely, and they do often. They have to get to the counselor in the school. The teacher should advocate for the child. The counselor should advocate for the child and say, perhaps we need to, let's look at what the issue is. What does the teacher say the issue is? What do the parents, do they see an issue? They may not see it in the home setting,
Right.
but we can explain our concerns to the parent. Parent has to sign a consent to evaluate. Whoever has custody of the parent, of the
Right.
child, has to sign a permission for us to evaluate. We can't evaluate without that.
Okay.
And as soon as that's signed, we had to set up a software system where we put in John Fagundes' name, and it will advance that name today, 30 days, school working days for evaluation. Then another 15 days to evaluate the child and to provide an answer as to whether they have a disability and need services. So it's all timed out.
Right.
You don't write it on a piece of paper, you put it into the computer program.
I would hope things have gotten better too as far as a stereotype. Are some kids hesitant to be in this program because they don't want to get picked? I mean, we were horrible in the 70s. I mean, admit it. I wouldn't say I bullied kids, but I joked around things that I now regret. I would assume things have gotten a little better.
Oh,
There's more acceptance.
A lot of acceptance because they have seen the children. They have played with the children. The visibly different children have always been there. We can't but observe someone being different in some way, or an articulation issue in speech. You hear it. But for instance, we try to take the differences away. Differences exist. They're not disabilities. Disability and difference are different things. So just to look out what we support in the schools, especially the elementary and the middle schools, are what's called unified sports.
Oh yeah, that's big. Right.
That was a big barrier. You can't play sports. You can't jump, you can't run, you can't do this, you don't know how to dribble the ball. But you have a peer partner who's on the team with you, and it just evaporates.
And a lot of the kids that play the sports that you referee, they turn out to support those kids, I've seen.
Absolutely.
And that's fantastic.
And that's a big peer partner thing.
Yeah.
Tom Brady does an awful lot with that too. They call them buddies.
Best buddies, right.
Absolutely.
Super. What are some of the other programs do you know that are going on now?
Speech and language is a big issue.
Okay.
Speech and language, because it happens with the little ones, and then it goes away as you remediate it and you correct it. But specific learning disability, hard to get your hands around. But as you just mentioned, someone who is visual and they need to get their things in a visual presentation to them.
Right.
We're going to learn, and we do learn, most of our knowledge through text.
True.
So if you have reading difficulty, that's where we have to focus our attention. Regular education and special education. We've got to get the reading level up as high as we can. We know that the newspaper is not written at the high school level for a 12th grader.
True.
Who would be reading it? Used to say 6th grade.
Right.
So all our attention goes to those kinds of life skills situations that even us out. We still will have our differences. You know, whether it's in athletics or something else, we know the differences, and the children are accepting of that. But New Bedford's done a great job in providing what we call free appropriate public education. It's called FAPE.
Okay.
That's what the child is guaranteed once they're identified and they're eligible. The parent with the child is guaranteed a free appropriate public education. That's the only child in America who must come to school.
Really?
We have to find children who are not in school
Right.
if there are suspicions of disability. When we go back to, this all got moving really with 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education, saying separate is not equal.
Right.
That's a period, that's not a comma, that's a period. What do you mean you have separate things? Well, we do it this, no, you can't do that. Well, the advocacy group was watching that for children who had handicaps. They watched what happened in 1954,
Okay.
which brought us to the 70s. States did little things, education for the handicapped children. That's the only words they used then. When they saw what happened at Brown versus the Board of Education, they jumped all over it.
Wow. We only have a few minutes left. I told you it flies by. What would you recommend to someone who they're noticing something with their child? Should they bring it up to their pediatrician first, or in case someone's watching who thinks, boy, maybe my child could use that, that would help? What do you suggest they do?
Well, it depends on the age, obviously. If the child is very young, I would talk to the pediatrician. It depends on what they're concerned about. So someone maybe to help them articulate to the physician what the school is seeing and what the parents therefore is worried about. Do I need one of those special education IEPs or not? And or talk to the principal or the counselor at school if it's a child who's going to school,
Right.
who is now 7 or 8 years old. But I would hope that someone has reached out to the parent before the parent has to do that.
Has to do it on their own.
And saying, we're concerned about this, that, and the other thing. Are you concerned also?
And I would assume the earlier, the better.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of fallacies there. A 3-year-old doesn't have to be in school. 4-year-old doesn't have to be in school. 5-year-old does not have to be in school. And I have to raise my hand and admit that years ago I did not realize that, because we have kindergarten in Massachusetts.
Right.
A district, an LEA, local education agency, has to have a kindergarten. But the parents don't have to send the child to the kindergarten.
I didn't know that.
They can stay home, and there's no truant officer going to go, or an attendance officer, because it's not they're not compelled. But the sooner the better, absolutely.
Right.
Look at the advantages for socialization, communication, and just being friends with other 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds.
Dr. Larry Finnerty, thank you so much for being with us. Great to see you again.
Nice to see you, Pete.
All right. And special education, again, National Special Education Day was held recently, and we salute the work of the New Bedford Public Schools. Until next time, I'm Pete Braley for Classroom Chronicle. Take care.